I want you to take out your wallet right now. Go ahead, pull out whatever cash you have. Look at it, really look at it. It's just paper, ink on cotton, a piece of fabric smaller than your hand. Now here's the question that will ruin your day, and I mean that in the best possible way. Why does anyone accept this? Why would a farmer hand over a year's worth of labor, grain, sweat, seasons of work, for a slip of paper that you can literally print at home if you have the right equipment? And before you say because the government says so, I need to warn you, that answer is about to collapse. Completely. Because here's the truth that economists don't put in textbooks, that banks don't advertise, and that most people go their entire lives without confronting. Money is not real. It never was. And on one specific date, August 15th, 1971, the last thread connecting it to reality was cut forever. This is the story of that thread, where it came from, how it held civilization together for thousands of years, and what happened the day it snapped. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at money the same way again. Let's go back, way back, before banks, before coins, before the concept of a price even existed. Imagine you're a farmer. It's 8000 BC. You've had a fantastic harvest. You've got more grain than you can eat. But what you really need is a new pair of shoes. So you find the shoemaker. You say, I'll give you grain for shoes. And the shoemaker says, I don't need grain, I need a goat. This is called the double coincidence of wants, and it was an absolute nightmare, because to trade, both people had to want exactly what the other had, at exactly the same time. Economists call this the barter problem. I call it the reason civilization almost didn't happen. 8000 BC. How do you trade a live cow for half a haircut? How do you divide a goat into fractions without it dying? Barter had no solution for this. It was local, clumsy, and it collapsed the moment you left your village. Think about how much this limited human ambition. You couldn't specialize, you couldn't trade across distances, you couldn't plan for the future. Every transaction required a miraculous coincidence. Humanity needed something better, something portable, something everyone agreed had value. And so, out of desperation, genius, or maybe just boredom, someone invented the first money. It wasn't what you'd expect. The first currencies weren't symbolic. They were actual things, real, physical goods that people agreed to use as a medium of exchange. In ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, barley grain was currency. You walked into a temple, deposited your grain, and received a clay tablet that represented your balance. Sound familiar? That's a bank account. In 3000 BC, in Africa, parts of Asia, and even ancient America, cowrie shells were currency. Small, uniform, hard to fake, easy to carry. They worked across thousands of miles of trade routes. 3000 BC. Cattle were money in many early societies. The word capital comes from the Latin capita, meaning head of cattle. When economists talk about capital, they're literally talking about cows. These early commodity currencies had one thing in common. They had inherent value. Grain fed you. Shells were rare and beautiful. Cattle could work, breed, and feed entire families. The value wasn't abstract, but there was still a massive problem. Grain rots, cattle die, shells break, and none of them could cross an ocean in your pocket. What humanity needed was something durable, something that didn't rot, didn't die, and didn't take up space, something that could be found in the ground. Around 600 BC, in the kingdom of Lydia, what is now Western Turkey, something happened that would rewrite the rules of civilization. The Lydians began minting standardized coins from a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver called electrum. They stamped each coin with a lion's head, the royal seal of King Aliatis. This was the moment money became official. The state was now guaranteeing value. You didn't have to weigh the metal every time. The stamp was the promise. And here's why this was revolutionary. Suddenly, a merchant in Lydia could trade with a merchant 1,000 miles away. Same coin, same stamp, same trust. Distance collapsed. Within 100 years of Lydia's invention, coinage had spread to Greece, Persia, India, and China, independently in some cases. The idea was so powerful it seemed to evolve simultaneously wherever complex trade existed. Coins gave rise to markets, merchants, and eventually empires. The Roman Empire ran on silver denarii. The Silk Road ran on gold. Every great civilization of the ancient world had one thing in common: standardized, state-backed metal currency. But metal was heavy. and empires needed to move money across vast distances. A soldier couldn't carry enough gold to fund an army. A merchant couldn't ship enough silver to buy a fleet. So the next invention was even more audacious. What if you didn't carry the money at all? In the 7th century AD, Tang Dynasty China invented something so radical that when a European first witnessed it 600 years later, he thought he was watching magic. Chinese merchants had been traveling long distances with enormous amounts of metal coins, and it was dangerous and impractical. So they created flying money, certificates of deposit. You left your coins at a government treasury, received a paper note, and redeemed it somewhere else. By the Song Dynasty in the 10th century, China had gone further. They were printing paper money backed by government promise, not by actual metal, just by trust. The world had never seen anything like it. 1271 AD. When Marco Polo arrived in Kublai Khan's China, he couldn't believe what he saw. The emperor was giving people pieces of paper, and they accepted it. He wrote that the Khan was performing what could only be described as alchemy. He was right. It was a kind of magic. But China also discovered the dark side of paper money, one that would haunt every civilization that came after. If you printed too much of it, it lost value. People stopped trusting it. The system collapsed. China experienced history's first hyperinflation. Prices exploded. The paper became worthless. And they learned the lesson that would echo for centuries. Paper money only works if people believe in it, and belief is fragile. So the question became, how do you make people believe? How do you anchor a promise to something real? The answer was gold. Always gold. And for nearly 200 years, it worked. The gold standard was humanity's attempt to solve the trust problem forever. The rule was simple. Every piece of paper money in circulation had to be backed by an equivalent amount of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. Britain adopted it formally in 1821. The United States followed. By the early 20th century, most of the world was on the gold standard. Every dollar, every pound, every franc was redeemable for actual gold. It felt unbreakable. It felt real. And for a while, it was. But then came World War I. Governments needed to fund armies. They needed to print money, far more than their gold reserves allowed. Country after country quietly abandoned the gold standard to fund the carnage. Then came the Great Depression, then World War II. By 1944, the old system was in ruins. The world needed a new order. At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 44 nations agreed on a new system. Every currency would be pegged to the US dollar. The US dollar alone would be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. America had over half the world's gold reserves. The dollar was as good as gold, or so everyone believed. And here's where the story turns dark. Because what the Bretton Woods Agreement created wasn't stability, it was a ticking clock. America now had to maintain its gold reserve while also funding the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, the space race, and the Cold War. You cannot do all of that and keep your gold. By the late 1960s, European nations, particularly France, started getting suspicious. They started asking for their gold back. De Gaulle actually sent a French warship to New York to collect France's gold reserves. The vault was emptying. The promise was cracking. And one man had to make a decision that would change every economy on Earth, forever. The fiercest, most consequential economic decision of the 20th century happened on a Sunday night, while most of America was watching Bonanza. August 15, 1971, Camp David, Maryland. President Richard Nixon, his Treasury Secretary John Connally, and a small group of advisors made a secret decision. They called it temporarily suspending dollar convertibility to gold. It was never reversed. Nixon went on national television at 9 p.m. that Sunday. He smiled. He was calm. He said it was a temporary measure to protect the American worker from international money speculators. Most Americans nodded and went back to their lives. The stock market actually went up the next day. People celebrated. They had no idea what had actually happened. In a single speech, 5,000 years of monetary history had ended. Every currency on Earth was now backed by nothing but the credibility of governments. Gold was out. Trust was all that was left. Before 1971, if you held a US dollar, you were holding a legal claim on a specific amount of gold. After 1971, you were holding a government promise. That promise is enforced by law, military power, and global economic convention. But it is fundamentally belief. Economists call the post-1971 system fiat currency. The word fiat comes from Latin. It means let it be done, as in by decree, by order. Money is now valuable because governments say it's valuable, because laws enforce it, because everyone accepts it, because everyone else accepts it. It's a collective hallucination, the most successful hallucination in human history. And almost every major financial crisis since 1971, inflation spikes, debt explosions, housing collapses, currency crises, traces back to the instabilities that were unleashed the moment the last anchor was cut. Because here's the problem with fiat currency. When money is backed by trust alone, the temptation to print more of it becomes irresistible. And someone, somewhere, was watching all of this, and they had a plan. October 31st, 2008. The global financial system is on the edge of collapse. Banks are failing. Governments are printing trillions to bail them out. The world is watching decades of reckless monetary policy detonate in real time. And on that day, Halloween, someone who called themselves Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page paper, a white paper, with a title that read like a quiet declaration of war. Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Nobody knew who Satoshi was. Nobody knows to this day. But the message was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The first Bitcoin block, the Genesis block, contained a hidden message, embedded in the code forever. The Times 03/Jan/2009 Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It was a timestamp and an accusation. Bitcoin was designed to be the opposite of everything that happened in 1971. Fixed supply. Only 21 million will ever exist. No central authority. No printing press, no government decree. Bitcoin's mathematical scarcity mimics gold. Unlike gold, it can be sent anywhere in the world instantly. Unlike fiat currency, no government can inflate it. Whether you believe it's the future of money or a speculative bubble, its existence is a direct response to what Nixon did in 1971. Since Bitcoin, thousands of cryptocurrencies have emerged. Some are scams, some are experiments, some are genuine attempts at a new financial architecture. But all of them share one origin story. All of them are, at their core, a reaction to the moment governments decided that money doesn't need to mean anything beyond their own word. The question is, was Nixon wrong? Or was he just the first person honest enough to say out loud what had always been true? So we've traveled 10,000 years, from cowrie shells in Africa to Bitcoin on a blockchain, from barley in Mesopotamia to a dollar backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States. And maybe now you can answer the question I asked at the very beginning. Why does anyone accept that piece of paper? The honest answer is, because you do. Because your neighbor does. Because the farmer, the banker, the government, and the merchant all agree, in a silent, unspoken contract, to honor the same fiction. Money is not gold. It's not paper. It's not code. Money is a story. The most powerful, most widely believed story in human history. And like every story, it only continues as long as people believe it. The civilizations that told this story well, that maintained trust, limited supply, and honored their promises, they thrived. Rome, when it debased its silver coins, collapsed within generations. Zimbabwe, when it printed money to pay debts, produced $100 trillion notes worth less than the paper they were printed on. And America, since 1971, has been conducting the longest and largest monetary experiment in human history. It hasn't ended yet. Every financial crisis you've lived through, every recession, every bailout, every bubble, it all connects back to one Sunday night in August 1971. So the next time someone tells you money is just money, remember what you know now. Remember the farmer who couldn't trade grain for shoes. Remember the Lydian craftsman stamping a lion's head into electrum. Remember Marco Polo staring at a piece of paper in disbelief. And remember Richard Nixon, smiling on television, telling the world everything was fine. Money has always been built on trust. The only question, the question that every generation has had to answer for itself, is trust in what? And trust in whom? I don't know the answer. Nobody does. But now, at least, you know the question. If this video made you see money differently, if you're going to look at that piece of paper in your wallet and feel something shift, then hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing we do here.